emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. Have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it, we've got to fulfill the book. So won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever hear is redemption song. Soldiers march their freedom out into the city streets. Though it seems like a losing battle, there can be no retreat. So won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever hear is redemption song.
Welcome again, everyone, to TNS Radio Ireland. I am Mike Montagne, original 1968 architect of Mathematically Perfected Economy, speaking on Mathematically Perfected Economy and Absolute Consensual Representation. Archives of this program are available at tnsradio.com under the category Mike Montagne and from the domain perfectedeconomy.org. Original material, analyses, and solution, as always, are copyrighted and trademarked by Mike Montagne. All rights, and therefore claims of authority, are reserved. Copies of this program can be downloaded and distributed freely only so long as the entirety of this program, including this copyright and trademark notice, remain intact. In last week's program, we exhaustively disqualified the mere plagiaristic idea that is advocated by the video Money is Debt, that money has to be spent into circulation, that spending money into circulation would solve the issues before us. Of course, in no way could you comprehensively argue for such an object without my long prior proof of inevitable failure under interest. So, in truth, this proposition that money must be spent into circulation depends on my invalidation of interest and exposure of the obfuscation of the currency, which of course it doesn't even attempt to relate, and of course from which it makes an invalid deduction that money must be spent into circulation in order to solve all of the issues before us, which of course is concern. As my work has long shown, this process is inherently inflationary. That is, that every unit of the circulation must have an obligation to pay and to retire from circulation, and we rightly associate this obligation with the consumer of the related property, which of course is what mathematically perfected economy does, and in so doing provides for us to sustain all of the prosperity that we are capable of by restoring our right to issue promissory obligations without exploitation. So, by assuming what are not truly debts, but promissory obligations to pay for related property as we consume of it, which is not necessarily at all to be interpreted as going into debt. It's saying that where we have a $100,000 home with a 100-year lifespan, we issue a commitment to pay for the home as we consume of it, or overall then at a rate of $1,000 a year, or $83.33 a month. So we've thoroughly invalidated this proposition that spending money into circulation solves our issues because it's inflationary, and because in denying us our right to issue promissory obligations, it would prevent a tremendous amount of prosperity that we could sustain only under promissory obligations, because we would obligate a newlywed couple, for instance, to save the $100,000 from a circulation meant instead to represent and convey transactions of something else, in order that eventually at the end of their lives instead they might get into a new home, whereas they could afford this new home easily across their entire lifespans under mathematically perfected economy, which reduces the cost to about 1/12 of what they are under the present system, or $1,000 a year versus $1,000 a month, or $83.33 a month. Virtually everyone with even the most menial job would readily be able to afford a home under mathematically perfected economy. So we've thoroughly invalidated this proposition of the video money as debt. A proposition of spending money into circulation, which is even plagiarism, and which, as we've shown, descends from my own work in this parable of perfect economy, where the words of Mike Montagne are spoken through the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin, in a second case where indeed I have Franklin explaining how we could fund government without taxation by spending money into circulation. Which example I provided as a teaching vehicle to explain how this was inflationary and how we would pay the costs of taxation through inflation. Thus there's no free lunch even offered, although it's pretended. And so we in turn would explain how all these issues are solved by the first case of that same parable, which is so much as to spend money into circulation as well, you could say. But on the contrary, each and every unit has attached to it this indispensable obligation to pay and retire principal from circulation. So hopefully we've sufficiently dispelled this idea that money must be spent into circulation and that we wouldn't suffer any evil at all under it. In fact, we would only be able to sustain a fraction of the prosperity we would otherwise by eradicating promissory obligations. So in fact, spending money into circulation would in truth be very damaging to us by denying us the advantages of sustaining prosperity beyond what we can pay for all at once by assuming enforceable promissory obligations. Nonetheless, thousands and thousands and thousands of sites have sprung up across the internet in the wake of my work, now advocating that money must be spent into circulation, as advocated by this invalidated video, Money as Debt, which is actually claiming that money must be spent into circulation. And so we have, as I've often said, we are our own worst enemies. It is our division from long ago presented facts of singular solution. It's our splintering from that original proposition, which itself not only has delayed our establishment of solution so long, but will continue to delay it ever onward into the future, especially as day by day by day we see ever more sites springing up where people have done no credible research in terms of original thinking, which may add to the necessary perspective of resolving the issues which are before us. Instead, they've read a few things or listened to a speech and decided they had a different idea that might work out too somehow. And they've never done the math. They've never subjected this thought to all of the circumstances and conditions which it must be tested under in order to prevail as a principle, an additional principle above those that we already have before us to recognize, which might serve us. There's no new material introduced by any of these pretended authorities of monetary solution. There hasn't been, in truth, since I introduced this idea of mathematically perfected economy in 1968. So what about all these things, and why might any of us give our attention to them? What do we accomplish by giving our attention to these contending propositions? Well, in truth, our problem is that if we understood and were so principled ourselves that when you have a conclusive, accountable set of principles, there is no further thing which we likely need to evaluate, to accommodate, to integrate into solution. We always listen for further things, of course, but if further material actually has something to present to us, and it's even a comprehensive perspective itself, first of all, it would be aware of this thesis of mathematically perfected economy. This reduction of any prospective monetary thesis into three prospective categoric faults, and a proof of singular integral solution of those faults, of everything that can possibly be wrong with any monetary thesis. Now, I dare say that no credible person giving cursory scope even to such a proposition could simply walk away to assert something else, because what is obvious when you give this cursory examination is that indeed, being as inflation and deflation are defined respectively as increases or decreases in circulation per represented property, there is one and one only solution to inflation